Hiro Mashima is probably one of the more popular shonen mangaka out there. Even if you don't know his name, you most certainly know at least one of his works. He's been active since the 90s, and he's easily one of the most prolific authors of his generation, at least when it comes to volume count. It wouldn't be far from the truth to call him one of the most successful mangaka of the last few decades, if not all time. Despite all this, Mashima's work has never made a very big impact on me, even though he's been in the business for as long as I've been reading manga. His first major work that I read was Rave, which, while never being my favorite, was a story I always appreciated for being a fun fantasy romp with cool powers, fun character designs, and occasionally emotional storytelling. The next manga I read of his was obviously his most popular series, Fairy Tail, which probably needs no introduction. It's a fairly standard shonen fantasy series about a guild of magicians that go around having adventures and beating up bad guys. I actually really liked Fairy Tail, at least for the first third of its run. It wasn't doing anything crazy, it was just a really fun fantasy shonen that knew how to hit all the right buttons. After a certain point though, the story started to get a little stale. I never came to hate the series, but I did lose a lot of love for it. And the tropes that felt refreshing and classic once started to feel overdone and tired. A lot of Mashima's bad habits got exposed over Fairy Tail's run, such as his over-reliance on cliched tropes or body fan service. That's why, even though it was sort of unfair, my first impression of Eden Zero was that it was just more of the same Mishima slop. In some ways, I was right. Eden Zero is yet another Mashima-style shonen action-adventure series. And if you've already read Rave Master or Fairy Tail, you kind of know what you're in for. Even so, the manga was a lot more fun than I'd expected it to be, and I do have to give it credit for that. If you're not familiar, Eden Zero is a sci-fi fantasy story about a group of adventurers who travel through space looking for the mythical mother, goddess of the cosmos and the origin of all things. We follow main characters Shiki Granbell and Rebecca Bluegarden as they go from planet to planet, meeting new allies and beating up any bad guys they find on their way. You're probably already seeing shades of Fairy Tail with that premise, and when you throw in Mashima's growing tendency to reuse and recycle character designs and concepts, it's not hard to look at Eden Zero and think he's basically rehashing the greatest hits. It's not the most unfounded opinion, honestly. With a rather standard action-adventure story full of magical powers and journeys to exciting new worlds, it's hard to not think of Fairy Tail even if the character designs weren't so similar. If you were thinking that Eden Zero would try to switch up the formula that Mashima has been working within for the last 20 years, you would be very wrong. Even so, despite not being particularly unique in any way, I do find Eden Zero possibly more fun than even Fairy Tail was when it was at its best. There are a couple of reasons for why I feel this way. The first reason is focus. I feel like Eden Zero, from the beginning, had a clearer idea of what the main character's goals were, as well as what kind of story it wanted to be. Every new arc felt like a logical next step on their journey, and every enemy they encountered had some tie or connection to their ultimate goal. This is in comparison to Fairy Tail, which always felt like it was a little aimless. You had an overarching big bad, but he wasn't always present or relevant to the story. Instead, every arc felt like an excuse to have the main characters fight a bunch of new bad guys, with little to no connective tissue within each arc. I know that's a bit of a reductive summary, but it's not one I think is wholly untrue given my own experience with the manga. There's nothing wrong with having an episodic structure, of course. Some of my favorite manga and anime are quite episodic themselves. But the way Fairy Tail went about it always felt like a drag to me. This ties into the other reason why I liked Eden Zero so much more, which is the pacing. The manga actually ended last year at 33 volumes, which is definitely a lot. Not every manga gets to break that big 30. However, Fairy Tail sat at a gargantuan 63 volumes, and a lot of that length is honestly fluff that doesn't really add much to the series' overall narrative. Eden Zero is still long, of course, but a lot of the fat has certainly been shaved off, making it a much leaner experience overall. Now, some might claim the opposite, that Eden Zero feels rushed compared to Fairy Tail, but personally, as someone who likes stories that try not to overstay their welcome, I think Eden Zero lasts as long as it needs to. Of course, If you weren't a fan of Mashima's works to begin with, Eden Zero is not going to be able to change your mind. It absolutely falls in line with the kinds of stories and characters he likes to write, and it falls into the same kinds of traps as well. I would never call Eden Zero a masterpiece. At best, it's a decent example of what shonen action adventure manga can provide. Do you want high-octane fights with magic-like superpowers? Do you want rambunctious adventures in sci-fi fantasy worlds? Do you want in-your-face fan service scenes from your voluptuous female lead? Then Eden Zero is built specifically for you, though it isn't going to particularly ring anyone else's bell. I don't want to undersell Eden Zero here. Despite being a very derivative and tropey sort of series, it's still a lot of fun, and maybe that's all the manga needs to be. Eden Zero is never going to be one of my favorite series, the same way Hiro Mashima will probably struggle to break even into the lower ranks of my favorite mangaka. But if you want to have a good time, and you want to read some classic boneheaded shonen, Eden Zero is going to be a good pick. Thanks for watching. I know this video isn't going to move everyone, and it's not even that impassioned of a push, but I do hope some people decide to check Eden Zero out, because I do believe it's worth a read or even a watch if you prefer anime. If you have seen or read Eden Zero, I'd love to hear your opinions on it in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and I'll see you next time.